Hello and good evening and welcome to our final session for today at 100% Optical Online. Today's CT program is brought to you in partnership with the AOP. I'm Ian Beasley, Head of Education for the AOP, and I'll be hosting the webinar while my colleague Molly is on hand to answer any technical questions. For those of you that have joined us for this final session, there were 6 sessions earlier on today which are accessible on the Swapcard platform on demand, although you can't obtain any CT points for consuming that content. The platform also allows you to interact with suppliers, arrange meetings, and tomorrow there's a day of business content that you might want to take a look at too. Now, just a few housekeeping points. The presentation will run for around about 45 to 50 minutes, and then we'll have the remainder of the hour set aside for any questions. There is one interactive CT point associated with this webinar, and we'll upload points in the next 10 working days or so. It's worth emphasizing that you need to attend for the duration of the session to be eligible for a CET point. We do have a chat function available to you, so you can submit any questions, and we'll try and get through as many of those as we can within the time frame. So we'll make a start now on this final session. I'm delighted to welcome Nick Dash, who's an honorary lecturer at Cardiff University, dry eye specialist at Midland Eye Clinic in Solihull, and optometric director of the Matrix Eye Clinic. And he's here to talk about dry eye in the digital age. So Nick, thank you for joining us. I know you've had a busy clinic this morning, and it's great that you've been able to join us this afternoon. So over to you.
Well, thanks very much, Ian, and also to Molly in the background. It takes a lot to actually bring this together, so I thank you both. And allowing me to talk about something that I believe in and have been working within optometry, and that is around dry eye. And over the course of the last year or so, we've seen potentially an increased sort of understanding of what dry eye is, but also we've seen a threat to dry eye caused by the digital age. And the last year has actually seen quite a monumental sea change, almost an evolutionary leap, let's say, rather than just a step in terms of the digital use of devices, a variety of devices. And with that, it is accompanied by 2 phenomena which we're seeing within optometry and eye care. One, which is dry eye, which is what I'm going to talk about today. And we heard earlier from Serena about that, a very eloquent talk there from Serena. And if any of you are on that, I'll try not to overlay what she was saying. But also this morning, we heard about myopia management as well. Both of these conditions seem to be a driver in terms of eye disease, because both myopia and ocular surface dry eye is a disease process. And so it's important that we understand a little bit of what's going on. And I'll talk about what the cause and effect of dryness is associated with the digital world. We'll look at some digital diagnostic techniques that allows us better understand the conditions of dry eye, and also then target solutions. When I talk about solutions, these are not drops. These are, in practice, usually therapies as a solution to dry eye. And maybe I'll give you some sort of interesting tips along the way, if that's possible, and share some insights. So this is going to be a presentation about dry eye, and there's not going to be a drop in sight. So it's about the digital age and ways in which we can best meet the needs of our patients. I'd like to be as up-to-date as possible. So a really recent article that's come out, which is from a pharmaceutical basis, actually is just this month. And so it's hot off the net. It's a study of the UK population, the general population, a 2,000 patient survey. And it looks at various things. The first of these that I'm going to highlight is the public perception around dry eye. And this gives us an understanding of what the beliefs are within the population of our patients. In actual fact, 36%, over a third of the patients within the general population, don't understand really what the symptoms of dry eye are and can't really cite those. Or if they do have some of those symptoms, they will not always attribute it to a dry eye condition. And also, almost a third of the patients, if they do have these symptoms, their first port of call is actually to do nothing and just allow this to resolve or expect it to resolve. Well, that's not really acting in the best interest of the patient or the individual if we just hope that this resolves. And really, as optometrists or CLOs in particular, with the option of looking at a patient on a slit lamp, we have an opportunity to better understand the clinical needs of that patient and best meet those needs. So great study here, no idea, and it was supported by some pharmaceutical companies. Oh, by the way, this presentation is sponsored by Essilor and Essilor Instruments, and whilst it is sponsored, they've had no input in terms of this study or my presentation today. They're just giving me a carte blanche to talk about dry eye as a way of supporting our professions. So this no idea study also comes up with the incidence of symptoms within the general population. And over the course of the last year, 43% report some painful eyes, sore eyes, or burning eyes. These are often symptoms of dry eye. 34% report watery eyes. Again, that paradox of a watery eye being a dry eye is sometimes difficult to understand, and maybe we can use digital technology to better understand that and extrapolate that so patients understand that really a watery eye is a dry eye. We'll come on to that a little later. Those patients that were in this group who were wearing contact lenses over the course of the year, and the symptoms correlate very high with reduced contact lens wear. So we understand that, as Serena was saying earlier, that the success of a contact lens is very much down to bathing it within a good ocular surface or on a good ocular surface and within a good tear environment. So these are some challenges. We're having symptoms, patients are underreporting, and if they do actually have this condition, how much of an impact does it have on their lifestyle? Within this no idea study, almost 20% have suggested that the symptoms of dryness actually affect sleep patterns. 14% say it affects their overall mood. Well, I couldn't be truly understanding of that. So last year in lockdown, I was out gardening, got something under on my eyelid, and I thought it would go away. It was lockdown, and so I didn't do much about it. I actually tried to wash it out, etc. Still gritty, and I put up with it. So I'm as bad as the general public. And in the end, I did go to one of my colleagues, and they averted the lid and removed a foreign body. So I'm very much like those. But the period of which I was getting that irritation, I was probably grumpy. I was a bear with a sore head or a sore eye. And so let's not underestimate the impact that dry eye has on the population. In actual fact, 30% of employees that work on computerized devices suggest that they have a reduced productivity associated with dryness of the eyes. So they either have to take more frequent breaks, or they lose focus and get distracted because of an irritable, dry or watery eye. A very much earlier study here, which I often cite, which is going back to 2011 with Lee, is actually looking at the impact of quality of life of dry eye. The various ways of doing this, it's a matter of saying, how many years of your life would you give away to overcome a syndrome or symptom you have? So on this, would you give away 2 years of the end of your life if you were able to live your life without a condition such as angina and such as renal dialysis? In actual fact, moderate to severe dry eye comes out on a very similar scale to angina. Moderate angina means that you can actually still carry on your day-to-day activities, but put a tablet under the tongue at times when you're getting that chest pain. Likewise, with moderate dry eye, you might actually put some drops in the eyes to overcome those symptoms, and it would allow you to progress. But with severe angina, it stops people in their tracks. With severe dry eyes, it stops people in their tracks. So it stops them working, it stops them enjoying life, it stops them socializing, and various other things. So living with dry eye has also been associated and correlated with heightened levels of anxiety and depression. So dry eye is important, and dry eye is important, and it's an important thing more so today in the digital age than ever before. So we've seen from various studies, and this is an Ofcom report from April of this year, based on a 3-month study up until April of last year, showing that on average, people above the age of 18 through to 55 were actually spending 4 to 5 hours per day on a computerized device. 4 or 5 hours per day. In actual fact, during the second lockdown, which was, the weather has not been so bad, we're actually getting 2 hours more in each of these groups. The top line there that you might see is the 18 to 24-year-olds spending 5 hours a day. It's now anticipated that these people are actually up to 7 hours a day. And that's going to have some impact. And what does it do? It creates this perfect storm. I've likened it to a sandstorm, so that gritty, sandy eye. And that's initiated because we understand that we don't blink as frequently when we're on an electronic device. During the course of the day, our blink rate, or we blink 20% less than we would if we weren't involved with a digital device. During the course of using a digital device, such as a mobile phone or an iPad, or other companies produce these products, but a tablet or a laptop, we're blinking, instead of every 8 seconds, we're blinking once in every 16 seconds. And with that, we're not flushing away anything that's in the eye. We're not spreading the tears across the tear surface. We're not replenishing that surface with a blink as frequently, and that allows an evaporation of the tears. In actual fact, the blink quality, the quality of the blink itself reduces. So we're not getting the collision of the top lid onto the bottom lid. And it's that collision of the upper onto the lower lid that allows the extrusion, that impact and then sucking of the meibum out of the lower meibomian glands, that allows the lipids, that front layer of the tears, which not only gives lubrication, but stops the evaporation, to occur. So we're getting an impact in terms of quantity of blinks, quality of blinks, whilst we're always in this environment, which might be a warm air environment with an airflow over the surface of the eye. Those perfect conditions, a light wind, warm environment for a long period of time will dry any surface. So let's have a look at a digital device that allows us to analyze blink. So we'll see if this video works. If not, don't worry. So I'm very, very fortunate. I work on the high street, but I also work within specialist clinics and part owner of a clinic, which is specializing in ocular surface conditions and medical contact lenses. So what is this telling us? This is a digital device called the IDRA from SBM, an Italian company, and it can show the fullness of the blink and the blink action in real time. But it also gives us a way of analyzing this. Along the lower graph there, you can see that there's a blue line that goes along and then comes up and then has a slight pause and then comes back down. That's the blink. So we're getting, in that situation, we're getting 100% of the ocular surface being covered for a short period of time and then returning to a normal open eye condition. So that's a normal natural blink. On computerized devices, we're getting 2 other type of characteristic blinks. If we go along the chart at the bottom to the second of those little peaks, it is a little peak, it's a short duration, and that short duration is a flick blink. So we're getting a closure, but it's not that full impact. It's not that full sort of natural blink. We're getting, I've got to see something on the screen so quickly, I'm not going to allow my eyes to close and then reopen. So it's a flick blink. And the third type of blink, which we see along the bottom line there, is an incomplete blink, which is something where the lid, as is demonstrated on the top right here, the lid has an incomplete lid closure, and you're going to leave that lower third of the conjunctiva and lower third of the cornea exposed. that exposure, it just allows the tears to evaporate, especially if the lipid layer that creates this surface tension and reduces evaporation, if that is compromised. So we're getting a double whammy here. We're getting different sort of blink regimes. So what can we do to overcome this? You may have heard of the 2020 blink routine, or 20-20-20 blink routine. And this might be after every 20 minutes, look away for 20 to 20 meters, blink 20 times, and then return. There are other ways in which we can do this, because changing somebody's behavior is difficult. And I'm going to illustrate a couple, actually 3 online sources. So we're using the digital device that may be precipitating some of the problems. If it's causing the problems, can it be part of the solution? So here we have an online app, which is Space. Find it on your phone, and it creates a good life balance. In actual fact, it can set up little targets. So you actually set a routine in terms of the length of time you might do something. You can set those goals. So on the top, on the right here, if you're on full screen, you might be able to see meet your time goals. Wow. Hit your unlocked goal. So it's giving you those positive reinforcements in terms of changing some of your behaviors. In actual fact, you can invite friends and compare your improvements in terms of the use of screens. And this can be across not just mobile phones, but also other digital devices. 2 other little apps here, which is RPact, which is something again that allows you an allowance of minutes, and it can be used to track a whole family. And you can use it to track kids, you can use it to track yourself, and this will hopefully have positive reinforcements, such as those sort of key goals. We might have one of those step counters on your mobile device or on your wrist, on your watch. And always having these actually sets goals. And if we have goals, we're more likely to meet those goals. So digital can be an advantage. We can use the digital world to solve some of the problems that have been caused by this epidemic of dryness of the eyes and also myopia, because this is something that we use in a myopia management clinic that I have, where we recommend certain apps to enable certain of the patients and the parents to monitor, but also to encourage good habits in terms of going outside to reduce the risk and mitigate the risk of myopia. But what have we done over the last year? We've actually got to learn from COVID. Let's take some of the positives out of COVID. So that might be that we've learned how to triage our patients a little bit better. So one of the triaging tools that I've used is the DEQ5. That's a dry eye questionnaire 5. 5 simple questions, very quick and easy to do, quite simple, not threatening to the patient. It talks about eye discomfort, eye dryness, and watering eyes, and it gives you a numeric value. And then numeric value allows you to either use that number to say whether or not somebody has mild, moderate, or severe, and triage the patient and react accordingly. But it also sets a baseline which we can use to ensure that patients improve their compliance with the drops or whatever therapy we might be using. So if you take nothing else away from today, think about DEQ5. It's a free downloadable program or leaflets that you can have that help you in that process. And this is the first process that we see on the DEWS 2 patient flow diagram. Now, most of you, I think, will have come across DEWS 2 as this very large periodical, a lot of peer-reviewed articles that give you an illustration of an understanding of what dry eye is, because it is multifactorial, it is quite complicated. And I apologize for the complexity of this slide, but I'm just going to go a little bit quickly through this. So it starts on the left with the red, which is triaging questions. Well, we can use the DEQ5 for that. What are the risk factors? We know what the risk factors are. Some of that is contact lens related. Okay, if we have a contact lens sitting in the tears, we're disrupting the tear film. We're going to increase the evaporation rate. If we smoke, certain medications can all impact on the quality of the tears. But I'm going to focus now on the diagnostic tests. So on the blue box here, we talk about symptomology, and the next one at the top of the box of 3 is a tear breakup time. And a tear breakup time of less than 10 seconds is abnormal, I'd say. So if your tears cannot sustain a period without a blink of more than 10 seconds, then there may be something wrong with the quality of the tear film. We're very familiar with the lower thing here, the lower box here, talking about ocular surface staining. I think most of us with a slit lamp can see whether or not we have superficial punctate staining, whether we have staining either with fluorescein and or lissamine green on the conjunctiva. So I'm not going to dwell on that. And I'm not going to dwell too long on the osmolarity, which is a very specialized test. Whilst I use this to give me a very quantitative data of the level of dryness, I'm going to concentrate more in terms of what the tools we have within a general practice. So we might have one, two, or three of those different equipments along the bottom line here. So we might have a slit lamp, a digital slit lamp. We might have a tear lab that measures tear osmolarity. We might have a topographer that we use for contact lenses. Or if we're fortunate enough, we might have a specialized device, which you can see at the top, which is the IDRA, which allows us to analyze the ocular surface in very many ways. So IDRA, rather like the topographer that we saw at the bottom right of the last image, creates a Placido disc, shines these concentric circles on the corneal surface. Well, in actual fact, that's actually not the corneal surface we're getting reflections from. We're getting those reflections from the anterior tear film. So that anterior tear film, those circles will start to break up once the tears break up. So this affords us an opportunity of what we call a non-invasive tear breakup time. So we're not putting the fluorescein in the eye, which is disturbing the tears. We're measuring the eye as close as possible to the natural eye condition. And these devices, these digital devices, offer an opportunity of tracking the degree of tear breakup. So in this case, we start with a tear breakup around about 3 seconds, and 50% of the tear film is broken up within 8 seconds. And it also gives us a geographic area where that breakup is greatest. So in a case where it's a lower third, you might be suspicious of an incomplete blinking. Okay. You can see in this next illustration on the bottom left, you can see the gross change in those circles, that reflected image of those concentric circles from the cornea or the anterior tear film. And you can see the areas that are allocated there. Again, on the bottom line here, the IDRA device gives us an opportunity to say the first breakup is 3 seconds, and with a almost significant 50% breakup around about 7 seconds. And this is not only useful to me as a clinician, but actually is a tool that enables us to communicate that effectively with patients. So we have a tear breakup time, which we can sort of upgrade from what we have with regard to the fluorescein installation and then watching the tear breakup. But one thing that we would like to do, and what TFOS JUICE 2 talks about, is monitoring the severity of evaporative dry eye. And we have to remember that the majority of dry eye is evaporative, so it's caused from the tears evaporating rather than a poor tear volume production. So if over 80% have a significant component of evaporative, this is due to the lipids, something wrong with the lipids. And the cause of this is either the quality of the lipids or that the glands that are producing the meibum, the oils for the tear film, that they're actually substandard, or they're damaged or absent, or have, as we often call them, dropped out. So we have interferometry, which is an analysis of the tear film itself. So this is the quality assessment of the tear film. On this illustration, you can see that oily sort of slick We're familiar with that. If we're walking down the road or we're driving and we see some oil that's spilled, we can see that oil collecting on the surface, and that fringing, those colors from diffraction, actually is causing those colors. And by analysis of those colors and those fringes, we can calculate the thickness of the tear film. In actual fact, this is a lovely tear film. So the tears are not homogeneous in any way. In actual fact, you'll often see when you look on a slit lamp, tears flowing upwards. That sort of non-Newtonian thing, it's the sort of appearance where, instead of Newton having the apple fall on his head from above, we're actually within the tears, we're seeing this very dynamic surface, which is actually being lifted after the collision of both lids, and that lipid being drawn up over the corneal surface. So interferometry is a lovely measure. There's two devices that actually allow us to measure interferometry. As I understand it, I may be wrong, but that's two, and IDRA is one of those. So we can actually do this, and within the IDRA device, on the image on the left, we have an eye that is very low in that lipid layer. We don't get any of those fringing. Then we're getting into the orange, the amber, red. If you look at the image on the right and you can see some of those fringes, we can say that's green, that's okay. So the quality of the lipid on the image on the right is great. The image on the left, with the quality of the tears, the lipids of the tears, is slightly subnormal. And so we might say, well, with the drops that we're using, we'll have a lipid component to that. There are new drops coming out that don't have any water in them at all, and actually synthetic sort of lipids. And so we're seeing some of these new technologies coming on board, partly because we can better diagnose patients. But also we might say there's not sufficient lipids. What can we do to drive the lipid production? Well, the source of the lipid production is the anatomy of lipids, is the meibum, the meibomium glands. Now, we're all familiar, I think, with meibomium gland and meibomium gland dysfunction, where we typically use heat bags and lid margin massage or cleanliness and scrubs and wipes, etc. But let's have a look at, in a little bit more detail, what meibomium glands can tell us. So within the device, digital devices using infrared technology, when we just invert the lid, this is a lower lid, so we're just turning the lid over a little bit. The middle image here just gives you that image of the meibomium glands with the infrared technology. You can see those little sort of little series of grapes, little areas. Those are those glands in the lower lid. And digitally, we can enhance that. We can increase the fluorescence, and that can give us a way of analyzing the tears. And not only visually seeing what the meibomium glands are, but within the IDRA device, we can actually get a numeric value of the amount of gland dropout. So in this, you can see that convoluted pattern of the meibomium glands, almost as if they've been somewhat disrupted. And this might be poor physiology as poor anatomy of the meibomium glands. But in this case, we got 24% of the meibomium glands being lost. Well, that's a great story. First of all, it's not a great story for the patient, but actually it's a great story. If they've got symptoms and we're saying we have poor lipids, we're getting evaporative dry eye. We want to maintain those 3/4 of the glands that are currently there. We need to do things that support the health and welfare of those glands. So it might be heat. It might be heat and moisture. It might be improving the lid margin with lid wipes. It might be eye bags, heat and moisture, or it might be some in-clinic treatments as well, because patients' compliance with a lot of these eye bags, I'm not sure if you're like me, but patients, if I recommend something, very often they don't always comply with those recommendations. But if we actually show them an image such as this, the compliance might be a little bit better. But not always. Compliance, it's nice to have a habit, but it's almost like going to the gym in the new year. You start with it and then it slowly tails off. So sometimes it's nice to actually have some sort of therapy within a clinic environment that actually improves this. So we're getting, instead of the meibomium glands dropping out, such as we can see here on the right, we can improve we'll never get those glands back that have died, but we can improve the functioning of the existing glands. And whilst improving those, we can help the flow of the meibum, the flow of the oils out of the glands rather than getting stuck in the glands. And this is essential. And part of the education points here relate to contact lenses. And I know Serena's sort of covered some of this. But for me, a success of a contact lens in the digital age, it's all about ocular surface. It's all about the tear film. Whilst very often we might change the type of lens, and that's the go-to, is think, oh, actually, I'll improve the lens onto a daily disposable, one which actually suggests that by name that it might be an oasis of fluid or moisture and stuff like this. But actually, I would turn that on its head and say, actually, find the oasis, the source of the problem, and treat the source. So that might be treat the dry eye rather than thinking about the contact lens. But I'm as guilty again as most others. And it's, when you've got a contact lens patient in front of you and you've got a contact lens in the clinic, it's rather like, every time you carry a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Then you're going to try and change the contact lens to best meet the need of the patient. So you might think about changing the material of the contact lens to a lens material that doesn't dry out. We might want to reduce the friction of the contact lens on the surface of the lens. We might want to reduce the modulus, the stiffness of the lens. We would often and immediately think about reducing the biofilm, improving the surface, cleaner the surface, so go to frequent replacement, typically daily disposables. We might look at the edge of the lens as well and change the design. Some patients, for whatever reason, the sclera is somewhat different and the sclera is not completely symmetrical. And sometimes you might get a bit of lift off, you might change the design, you might change the fit of the lens. And this is exaggerated in an RGP lens where we're seeing 3 and 9 staining on the cornea, which is actually that desiccation where the tear film is being disturbed to a level where the disturbance is causing that acute dryness 3 and 9 o'clock on the paralimbal areas of the cornea. And without that, we would go for a zero preservative solution if we're using replacement lenses and look to implement a lubricant either within the contact lens solution or as a supplement. But most of us would actually think of changing the material. Well, actually, that's important because we've gone over, a lot of us have gone over to silicone hydrogels, haven't we? Well, I think most of us have because we've been told about the oxygen permeability being important, but it may not be crucial to think of that as the primary reason for fitting a specific contact lens. In actual fact, nowadays, and especially with some of these patients where we're going to fit a contact lens at age 6, especially for myopia control, if you're putting a contact lens on an eye at age 5, 6, and you may be going all the way through to presbyopia, we actually want to maintain a good ocular surface. We don't want to compromise the lids and the lid margins. So by improving the coefficient of friction, so making the lids more easily glide over that anterior lens surface, we're going to keep the lid healthy, much more healthy. If we reduce the modulus, the stiffness of the lens, it's more drapable, and you're going to get less of those edge effects and less disruption to the tear film. We want to improve the dehydration characteristics and make the lens more biocompatible. And so that all goes hand in hand. But, contact lenses for life. Okay, we want to preserve the comfort of contact lenses, and we know a lot of contact lens dropouts that discontinue from contact lenses is just because of ocular surface conditions, that dryness. And that's partly because contact lenses impact on the top lid. The top left image here is actually a normal eye with lissamine green and showing a very fine line, which is still called Starleaf line. Underneath that, you can see an area, an image that actually has more of the lissamine green taken up within the conjunctiva, showing that we've got some fibrosis of what we call the lid wiper epithelium. And that's rather like the wiper of a car, a windscreen wiper of the car. So we actually want to keep that nice and moist. We can also see things such as the telangiectasic vessels here. And as we all understand, you can see the blockage of the meibomian glands and the meibum there being a bit sticky. Also with contact lenses, think not just in terms of the material, but look at the visual quality. It's very difficult to distinguish between digital eye fatigue and also dry eye. That's a difficult thing for patients to understand. And we're asking patients now to look from distance continuously up into a near focus. And we want that extended depth of focus. And so that's why we have new products coming out called extended depth of focus lenses, EDOF lenses. We have a few of those, the Naturgy, the Safilens, and the Seat lens. So those are currently coming out. And they're not only just for presbyopia, but they can be digitally enhanced lenses that improve that range of focus. And with that improved quality of vision over the range, we're getting less eye strain and less visual fatigue, less squinting. So lipids are the go-to, but we must also talk a little bit about the aqueous deficient dry eye, which is where the patients don't produce enough from the lacrimal glands. In fact, the way we do this within normal practice is to look at the tear meniscus height, the tear prism, whatever you call it, and we take 3 measurements along the lower lid. And again, this is important with patients with lacrimal gland deficiency, and that can be anything from Sjogren's syndrome, autoimmune conditions, even some patients that have had some treatments for acne rosacea as well, where they've had systemic medications that actually have turned the lacrimal gland production off. And those are the severe patients. But I put this image up because most patients want to see it to believe it, okay? We're in an age where we have a lot of cynical patients. And we all like to see a problem. We like to see our own eyes. So by having a digital technology, and this is a picture which we could create in a 3D image that looks at the meibomian glands, and you can see that there's dropout there. By digitally improving the quality of our diagnosis and improving the communications to patients, we get better buy-in and we get very much better appreciation for patients. And that means it's a practice builder. And actually it supports and enables us to create an examination report. So this is an examination report that from one of my patients, and we can send this to the patient, we can send it to the GP, we can send it to the dermatologist that's caring for the patient. But all in all, it gives us a great idea of understanding of what it is we need to do. And the game changer for me is customizing the treatment based upon a good diagnosis. So what are the treatments? What are the digital treatments that we might have in practice? Now, these are really high tech, but all of these are available. There's new lids on the right there, which is a device that's fairly new and quite affordable. And we go all the way through to several tens of thousands of pounds of different equipment. And I've been very, very privileged to have a look and try some of these. My go-to at the moment, and what I think has been a real game changer in terms of the treatment, is something called IPL. For you guys out there who think IPL is the Indian Premier League in cricket, then think again. What IPL is a treatment, and I'm going to talk about cosmetic procedures here, such as hair removal, and actually to treat fine lines and wrinkles. And this was a technology that, whilst it was being applied to the facial area to reduce some of that telangiectasic vessels, those very fine spider vessels, they found that some of those patients with dryness of the eyes who had had this treatment subsequently resolved their symptoms. So red light therapy, and it is only light, it's not a laser, offers a therapy of deep heat together if it is pulsed, and that's what the IPL is, intense pulsed light therapy. The pulsing changes or has a positive impact on the innervations, the nerves of the glands. So in IPL, we're seeing reduced telangiectasic vessels, so that less redness, we're getting less inflammation, and we're getting more flushing of the sebaceous glands. And in the eyes, we talk about meibum. And we're still undecided whether or not the IPL just either scares the Demodex because they don't like light. So if we have a Demodex blepharitis patient, we might use it. Or in actual fact, we're just getting a flushing of the meibum out of the meibomian glands that actually reduces the bioload of the Demodex. So intense pulse light therapy downregulates inflammation. It reduces oxidative free radicals, but it upgrades and upregulates the neural activity of the body. An IPL is a series of treatments, which I'll just touch on here. We actually have 3 or 4 sessions, which is, can be done in the normal consultation chair. And it's nice and friendly to patients. It's quick and easy. We place 5 applications of this pulse light, and it works for the vast majority of patients. So is it evidence-based? Well, we've returned to the JUICE-2 here. Evidence from the JUICE-2, and this is from Jenny Craig, who actually used to work at the Midland Eye Clinic where I now work, and she's now Dean of the University of Auckland. So well done, Jen. But one of her leading studies suggested there's 89% improvement in dry eye symptoms, 77% improvement in meibomian gland function. And for me, when conventional therapies have a tailing off, as I said before, you get an immediate improvement, and then the poor compliance means that the patients return to normal. So in this case, we've got a tear breakup time of 36 patients. 2 months after initially starting the therapy, but they return to baseline at 6 to 12 months. But with IPL, we're getting a very much more dramatic improvement in tear breakup time. So the tear breakup is above 10, so it becomes normal in a lot of these patients, from 6 seconds going up to beyond 10. And that actually stabilizes for a number of years afterwards. So it seems to be doing something for one of those core objective measures that we look for. In terms of symptoms, this next graph sort of shows the same, albeit that the graph is the opposite direction. So we have symptoms, and the higher the symptom, the more dryness there is. So we start with a symptom on the DEQ-5 of 16 on average, and it drops to 8. And this remains 8, around about 9 for 2 years afterwards. So it is doing something that almost alt control and deletes the meibomian glands and the production of the lipids. Osmolarity, it improves osmolarity. And across the range of different patients with different diagnoses, we're getting good outcomes. Let me just explain this diagram a little bit for you. The 2 bars on the left, the blue treatment is the IRPL, so the intense regulated pulse light therapy. So that's the EI machine that I've been using. And then the block after it is my conventional therapies that I would do in practice. So with aqueous deficient dry eye, I'm only getting 37% of patients halving their symptoms or halving the signs. And this is a composite score, which I don't have time really to discuss too much here, but it's a composite of symptoms and signs. So you may think, oh, well, it's not doing very well there. Well, you have to understand aqueous deficient dry eye is a loss of the lacrimal glands. And the IPL unit perhaps doesn't target the meibomian glands. It does improve the lacrimal glands a little bit. But actually, by supporting some more meibum being produced, we're getting some improvement. And those are desperate patients. So Sjogren's patients with very severe dry eye, anything is better. These are the patients that you might have putting drops in every 20, 30 minutes during the course of the day. But the vast majority of patients actually come into the next 2 groups. The EDE is evaporative dry eye with no lid margin disease, and evaporative dry eye with lid margin disease. So within those patients that have meibomian gland dysfunction and blepharitis, then we're getting a 90% improvement in this composite score. So the success rate is very good. And actually, these results parallel what Jenny Craig got in New Zealand. So we're not too different from the New Zealand cohort, I think. So we're doing pretty well there. So I've gone through the diagnosis. I've gone through the understanding of the digital age and the impact that's having. We've gone through a little bit of the diagnosis. And I've just highlighted just one of the areas that I use in terms of managing that patient. We never cure a patient with dry eye, but we manage them. And together, what I've done over the course of the last couple of years is to create a sort of tips, protocols, and a philosophy about dry eye. And I can share these with you if you want to email me. I'm more than happy to forward these to you. But the first step is, as always, and it's following the same lines as it's used to, which is triage and diagnosis. So triage can be as simple as the DEQ5. Treat the cause. So focus on the cause rather than the effect. Just by putting drops in the eyes, we're just masking the cause in some ways. It's like putting a sticking plaster over an open wound. We're just masking it. We're not treating it. And some of these lesions are something that needs a few stitches to overcome it. Otherwise, it's going to keep opening up. So we want to try and do more than just mask causes. We need to set expectations. And I actually like to have a consent form within the practice so that patients have those set expectations. And they've consented to a part home as well as in-clinic treatment. We have a show and tell in terms of education. By showing people on digital devices, we're getting much better buy-in and better effect, but also better opportunity to treat these patients. And I treat a patient almost as if they're a contact lens patient with follow-up appointments, and we can put them on a direct debit according to their therapy regime. Again, dentist does no different to this. Dentist has a hygienist and then has follow-ups. And I also say it's a multifactorial condition and you'll need multiple treatments and ongoing treatments, and put also part of the emphasis on home as well as clinic combination of treatments. So I didn't want to overrun because it's the end of a long day for you guys as well as myself. And I'd like to thank you all for your attendance and your diligence to getting through this. And we do welcome questions. And should you feel you want to email me away from this, I'm more than happy to take emails, questions or inquiries or requests to nick-at me.com. So, and as according. So any questions?
Nick, thank you. Thank you very much. A great way to end our program today. A fascinating lecture. We've got quite a few questions come in, so if we can crack on with those. A couple of people asking about IPL and if there's any risk of ocular damage from the procedure. Okay, there have been a very few cited cases of ocular damage. So the IPL can be, there's a couple of devices there where the output is not historically been regulated as well as you would like. So some of the technology has been brought about from YAG laser technology, and sometimes the regulation of the emissions here has caused a little bit of an issue. So the EI device that I use doesn't have the intensity and can never achieve the intensity which would actually cause some damage to any of the deeper tissues of the eye. So there have been rare cited cases associated with one or two pieces of equipment. And whilst I do most of the IPL sessions myself, I also have a nurse who is an optometric nurse who does some of the procedures for me whilst I'm in the clinic as well, but she does them. But the one thing that we do find is that the IPL does, you do have to take the precautions of wearing the protective eyewear, almost like those eyewear that you would have on a sunbed, but you also have to protect the hair follicles. So if you have somebody with facial hair or moles, or as in my case, I have a telangiectasic sort of birthmark, then you need to cover those because you don't want the red end of the spectrum selectively being absorbed in those areas and damaging that vasculature. It only does damage the vasculature of these very fine detailed vessels, those telangiectasic vessels. The only time it would actually impact on the other vasculature is if the dose is very much high, and we've had very dramatic improvements in that. I've not seen any of these, any issues myself, but yeah. Thank you for that question. question about the DEQ5. Is that something that you would go through with every patient on every visit?
Within a specialist dry eye clinic, yes. For sure. It takes about 2 minutes, and it gives you a really simple metric that empowers the patients to tell you what those symptoms are. And sometimes you can prize some of the relevant questions from the patients and develop those answers. So if it's more about watery eye, then you can talk about why stabilizing the lipid layer reduces the wateriness of the eye and by retaining more tears on the surface. So within a dry eye patient, yes. I don't routinely, but if patients have, come with symptoms of dryness of the eye, which is quite a few patients, as we've seen 40% of patients reporting some of those symptoms, then I would get them to complete this questionnaire. You can do it in front of them. It's almost like doing your history and symptoms. It doesn't take long, and it's great to have that metric at the end of it. And the other thing is, it's great patients love the concept that someone's taking this seriously, because very often they've had these symptoms and they've thought, well, I'm not going to bother the optometrist, I'm not going to bother the contact lens practitioner, especially the contact lens practitioner, because they fear that they're going to have the contact lenses taken away from them. So actually, by prizing some of these relevant answers out of them, we can better understand their underlying condition. No, I don't use it routinely. I do know some clinics and that do use it routinely, and there's nothing to say we shouldn't do it as part and parcel of that pre-assessment questionnaire. If we're doing autorefraction, we're doing intraocular pressures, it's quite easy for someone to sit down with the patient for another minute or two to complete this, or just asking them to have it at the end of that pre-screening.
Just leading on from that, do you ever get the patient to complete those questionnaires in between visits so that you get a snapshot over a long period of time?
Yeah, and we can send those out. So I have a nurse that often works alongside me, and so she does a lot of this ongoing contact with patients, and we'll send a DEQ5 out, and we got that in a digital format so that patients can complete it. It's empowering to the patients to have somebody understand that it's a real condition, and they like to do that. I'm at liberties, I think, to discuss the fact that there's a pharma company and also a diagnostic company that are creating apps where you can interact more fully with the patients, and actually they're being reminded, or will be reminded, it's time to put your drops in, or it's time to come back for another assessment, it's time to undertake the DEQ5. So those are all in place. So that's another way we'll be using digital technology to improve that compliance of patients.
And Nick, I know that the talk was specifically not about drops, but inevitably
there's no avoiding them.
we have got a couple of questions about drops. I don't know whether you're happy to take those or not.
I'm more than happy to take those.
Yeah, so the first one is, what's your go-to drop? What would you use, and ointment? It
depends whether I want to. It depends on the diagnostic features. Okay, so I really don't have a diagnostic drop. I have a drop that I have a go-to if the tear osmolarity is too high. Then I go for something that is isoosmolar. If I have someone who has a lid margin disease, then I would go for a drop that actually supports that lid margin. If I have a patient who has a lack of lipids and so got that tear breakup time that is too short, then I'll go with one which is a lipid base. A go-to. It's difficult for me to put my finger on one in each of those, because it does need to be tailored. Otherwise, we become like the pharmacist, and then we're just dishing out something that is our go-to. Well, the pharmacists, unfortunately, often still go for the preserved hypromellos, which is an absolute red flag no, because we don't want to be putting preservatives in the eyes. So I would choose a preservative-free drop. Very often it's got a lipid component within that drop. Sometimes we look at the HA, so we go for a 0.2 or 0.3 HA preparation. We'll go for an isoosmolar preparation together with some sort of saccharide there, and that can be something like Tailose, that actually is a naturally occurring saccharide that we would use, and that actually is believed to improve not only the tear film at that time, but offer some support to the process of healing of the lids and lashes.
And the second question on lubricants is, what would you recommend for patients with Sjogren's?
Scleral lenses. Oh, sorry, you wanted drops. I actually do. I use Sjogren's. I fit a lot of scleral patients. So this morning I fitted a scleral patient with a patient with Sjogren's syndrome with a scleral contact lens, and they work really well. So a scleral lens, in case not everybody knows, is it really all the glands have been turned off. Okay. Because it's an autoimmune background. It's a syndrome, so the actual cause we don't know. But primary Sjogren's patients are very desperate patients. They don't produce any volume or quality of tears. So whilst it's not absolutely the first course of port of call, I would often use a scleral contact lens, because by the time they get to me, they've often tried all the drops in the formulary. They've searched the internet. You know, they come in with that carrier bag of drops that they tell you, well, I've tried this, I've tried that. And so then you have to look at, you know, is there an opportunity to improve any of the gland production? And that might be IPL in the primary stage, but it is very often and more often the case. I'm actually now using scleral contact lenses that vault over the whole of the cornea, and a lot of the conjunctiva. So we have lenses of 18, 19, 20 millimeters diameter. So comparing that to the 14 or so millimeters of a soft lens, we're vaulting the whole of that area. We're trapping behind the lens a volume of fluid. So we use saline together with an HA, preservative-free HA, that actually bathes the cornea and the conjunctiva. And we can get patients that have been home, you know, have not escaped from home because of their eyes being so dry, using drops every 20 minutes, to being able to sit in a car, drive to the appointments, and be comfortable sat in the consulting room chair. So we go from patients that can't have the air conditioning on when they walk in the room and ask for the lights to be turned off, to turning around and actually having patients that come in and just saying they're getting on with life. It can be a big thing. So in terms of, that's my go-to at the moment, is a scleral contact lens, but supported with ocular lubricants. And those ocular lubricants, I would have something with a fairly long residency time. So to improve the residency time, the amount of time that this drop stays on the eye, is the important thing with these patients. Most drops will, let's say hypermelos, will only be resident in the eye for less than a minute. So by putting various gels or lubricants that don't dehydrate, or we have a drop, which is the Evo Tears, which is coming through, which doesn't have any lipid, it is effectively almost like a synthetic lipid, we're actually going to get a better residency time on the ocular surface.
Great. Another IPL question. So how long have you been using IPL, and has it been long enough for you to know if there's a decrease in efficacy over time, or have any studies shown a decrease in efficacy over time?
I've been using IPL for the last 4.5 years. Have we seen drop off? Yes, we're finding that a certain number of the patients, and we can usually target this, we can understand why it happens. So we say that the initial treatment, the course of 3 or 4 in the initial stage, will often need topping up after 12 months in a large number of these patient groups, they benefit from that little top up. Some patients will top up even at 6 months, but most of them, it's a year or two down the line that we'll be looking at doing a top up. We do have patients that come in and say they want to top up, and you say, well, why do you want to top up? And they said, well, it did such a good job last time, I want another one. And I say, well, all the metrics are saying that you're doing really well. Are you sure you need it? And they say, well, just in case I get added benefit. So patients love the treatment. They love the idea that they're not got to carry that chemistry set around with them in their pockets or their handbags, that they used to have. We never say that we're going to get them out of drops altogether. We're going to significantly reduce their drops. So if you're going to halve the amount of drop usage, patients like that, if you enable them to go out socially and not have their makeup adversely affected, or have, another patient that I had from earlier this week, she'd had IPL, and she came in and said it's great because I used to get my grandchild coming to me and saying, Grandma, why are you always crying? And that's impactful. Now she's confident that her eyes are not going to be tearing up because of the dryness of the eye. So there's little things like that actually little take-home messages saying, actually, we're doing something that improves quality of life, not just, treating a little bit of dry eye.
Thank you, Nick. We've run bang on time, so thank you for giving up some of your Sunday evening. I know you've had a busy day.
Well, no, thank you for everybody who supported the conference, albeit online. I know it's been difficult times for everybody, and I thank everybody for joining me today. And it's been an honor that you've actually listened to me for this length of time. So thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Fabulous. So if you have any further questions about this webinar, you can email events@aop.org.uk. If you've got specific clinical questions, then Nick has kindly given his email address. And just a reminder that we have now delivered 7 hours of education today, which is available on the SwapCard platform. So if you want to revisit any of that content, or perhaps there are members of your team that were unable to attend today, they can access all of those webinars without CET, of course. And you can continue to revisit SwapCard to engage with suppliers and book meetings. And remember, we've got a day of business content that will be streamed throughout the day tomorrow. And then also a final reminder that we very much look forward to seeing you in a face-to-face environment, 22nd to 24th of January at London Excel. And a final thank you, and I applaud all of those of you that have joined us since 9:30 this morning. Fabulous stamina. And with that, I'll bid you all a good evening.
And Ian, before you go, I want to say a thank you from us at 100% Optical for your work and all the AOP, as well as all our speakers today, you, Nick. There's been lots and lots of positive feedback. So thank you very much.
It's good to hear, Nathan. Thank you.
Thank you.